Good afternoon, everybody. Professor York here again. I have a very short piece on tools for managing products. This is for marketing managers. And I think this is very timely because we just finished up the Cleopatra case. I think that there are some great learnings that could be taken and applied with these frameworks that I will discuss to Cleopatra. And I will provide a few illustrations on the back end of this lecture so that you could see what we ended up doing when we approached this case based on some questions that we were given over at Kelly School of Business. So, what did Colgate-Palmolive do in Quebec? All right, I mean, when you think about it, they have this product that was successful over in France. So, what is your choice? Did they fire and ask questions later? So ready, fire, aim. Or did they ready, aim, and fire? And that's really when you boil down to some of the big issues there. And that could have been a really great thematic story that could have been pulled through the presentations. So yeah, I want to sort of pivot back to the closing questions that are here, because I think when I looked at the presentations, one of the things that struck me was, we were talking about what do you do? Okay, so, this is where I was looking to see what individuals would take in terms of a stake in the ground when we did SCQR. So the recommendation would be, Steve, will you admit defeat and discontinue the brand? 2 is continue the strategy with minor modifications if necessary and try to get a 4.5% market share by giving it more time and support. Or 3, alter the strategy and even the product itself. And these are questions that marketing managers, but even commercial leaders deal with from a strategic standpoint. When they enter into new markets and they don't achieve their goals, they make new acquisitions, such as company that I had done some consulting with that for about 13 years was acquired by a larger company, and performance did not achieve what was expectation, and now this company is being considered to be shopped on the block for maybe a $15 billion discount. So, and sometimes it's time to cut your losses, and that's fine, and realize that those are some costs. On the flip side is that if you have taken what I call the ready, fire, aim, maybe you need to take a step back, do some market research, and understand your business and the marketplace, and see if you can then identify who is that customer that you really should be targeting. What are the dynamics around that customer and the customer's job to do. 2 is the channel, understanding the channel and the channel dynamics in terms of being able to push the product in, but also to have the requisite pull that is there by the customer, by making sure a third piece is that you have a resonant brand. So rebranding could be another issue to consider, rather than taking what the brand look and feel and campaign was over in France, but to look at what might be resonant over in Quebec. Okay? And so to make a much more meaningful relationship, make sure a product concept brings home that the benefits are truly tied to that concept and to the messaging, which is it really was a major problem if you look at the ad copy. Whereas if you compare to Dove, you see Dove had defined benefits to a certain segment, and last but not least is a call to action. So in essence, they were defining the job to do and going one step further, which I love in ad copy, which is call to action. So what they really needed to do was fire? No. They needed to ready, aim, and fire. So let's talk about some tools that will help the folks over at Colgate-Palmolive be a little more effective in terms of making portfolio analysis, because that's basically what they were doing is in going into a new market. And so there are a few tools I think would be helpful. Definitely put in your toolkit, both for marketing and for strategy. So there are 4 key strategies to think about with products: build, hold, harvest, and divest. Okay, and if you look at it, it depends on where the product is in its life cycle, and we'll go into this a little further. But if we first look at just the build side, okay, so if we are going to look at building a business and looking at improving market position, increasing promotion, adjusting price to improve performance, marketing is concerned here, as well as here in terms of remaining the current position, maintaining the market effort, and the goal is to maintain market performance of products. So let's pivot back. In our Cleopatra case, we're definitely in the build. If we decide to go in, we have to build. We're at below performance expectations. But a contrarian view would be, well, maybe we divest. Maybe we could put resources better in other places, in other markets or other products. And so consider withdrawing that market support. And that was one of the considerations that Colgate-Palmolive had. And the other strategy is harvest, where you think about selling that business unit or product to gain short-term increase in cash flow. And this happens when the strategic focus of the company changes. So that's a question. Does Colgate-Palmolive want to divest from this product? It's in this marketplace, probably not, because they're being very, very successful with the brand over in France. So I don't know whether that would be attractive. Divesting the strategy in terms of that, usually you'd look at in terms of when you are selling off a brand or selling off a division, you want to get away from it, or you just walk away from that marketplace. And that is something that we tend to see in these bottom two, that finance tends to drive, because they're looking at, when you look at that sixth question about the rate of return, you start thinking about, okay, I've invested in the marketplace. I've built a model for demand, which was basically the purchase driver scorecard. And I tied an income statement. And then what we did is I had 2x2 to look at factors to drive in terms of increased demand and in terms of increased bottom line return. When you're making a business case, one of the tools or two of the tools that you'll have part of making your business case up front is going to be the financial tool. And many MBAs will use what we call a net present value analysis, which is basically money today versus money tomorrow. And that money tomorrow is discounted. Okay, so in essence is if I put $1 in investing into a strategy today, then I would expect tomorrow or a year from now and 2 years from now, and that's how they do the assessment, is they discount back the cash flows that are coming in, or the savings that would be, or the net increase in revenues, to be able to make a decision whether that investment was well worth versus just what we call a general discount rate that might be if they would just put the money in the bank. And this is decisions that senior managers make relative to a variety of things: acquisitions of product, acquisition of capital, equipment, going all in on a marketing campaign. So this is one of the things that on question 6, I would expect a little bit further. However, considering that most of you have not been through a strategy class or a finance class, I didn't expect as the answer. However, if you did bring in the purchase driver scorecard, you brought in a little of the income statement, then you're more the better. Okay, but in this case, I think we could probably pivot back to either the build strategy, divest strategy. But build strategy, I saw most folks in their presentations moving towards. Okay, marketing tends to be build, hold. Finance is looking at the money and trying to hold on to the money. So it's harvest or divest. But let's take this a little bit more. There's a great consulting group in Boston Consulting Group, that has this classic 2x2. And in this 2x2, what they do is they look at various products in terms of, where do they fit relative to the annual rate of marketing or market growth. So how is that market going versus your relative market share? And the reason why that's important is that it helps you make some better decisions around, do you go and build, or do you harvest, or do you divest? So those are things that you have to think about in here. And this dynamic that BCG has put forth, I think, is really important. So some of you may be aware of stars and cash cows and dogs and big question marks. And so realistically, the ideal situation when you are in a what we call a high market share and a high growth market is you're looking to invest in your stars. Okay, this is going to bring tremendous rate of return into an organization. So high growth marketplaces, new innovative products, that's what you're looking at having stars. So tech is very much like that, especially if you're first mover in a whole new space where it's blue ocean. Okay. The cash cow, or the cow, is where you have relative high market share, but the growth of the market is pretty flat. So that is an area where you may not overinvest, but you may maintain the market. Okay, then you got these things called dogs, and I love dogs because I've had dogs for 25 years. But from a business standpoint, we need to really think about this, and divestiture is where we go with dogs, because the growth is low and the market share is low, and it's really pulling capital away from where it could be invested into other market products or markets or opportunities that are there. And so the one that really becomes perplexing, which we see with really, when you think about it, Cleopatra could be in this high in terms of market growth, or it could be in this low one, which is interesting, because if we look at the soap market growth, it seems to be sort of flat, stable, maybe growing a little bit, and it's really what we call a red ocean business. It's really fighting for market share that's there. So if you decide that there's some growth, okay, and that you have low market share, then this becomes a big question. You got to do further analysis. Okay, so as you can see, the analysis is to determine whether the business can be grown into a star or denigrate to a dog. Okay, so these are the hard questions. So even before you get into, we talked about the strategies for a growth situation, but if you go pivot back to what Steve Boyd was looking to make a decision, these are some frameworks that would help him a whole lot as well. Okay, another useful tool is a market analysis grid, which to grow a product. And the key point is it's about fit. Okay, so when you look at existing markets, okay, so say we were in France as an existing market, you want to know about market penetration, with existing products, and then you also are going to look at new products. So it's existing versus new. So, and then your new markets, again, you're looking comparison existing versus new. So if we look at Cleopatra, and this is very critical to both build and hold strategies, what we need to think about is we got a new product in a new market. So the question is, are we diversifying here? This is what's happening strategically. We're going into new things. Or are we existing? We're actually an existing product. Okay, and we are in a new market. So really what we have to be thinking about is this whole market development area. And when you do market development, the first thing you need to do is market research. And you need to get to know the customers really well. That is both your target customer as well as the channel customer that's there. So market research needs to be done. So the market research that was done in Toronto was just totally inadequate when we consider that the target market was Quebec, which had a large market size for the Canadian relative to the whole Canadian marketplace for soap. And the customer archetypes are very different in Montreal and Quebec than they are in Toronto. French in nature, their French nature tends to be very different from a socioeconomic standpoint, and even culturally from the Parisian French. And even in the language, there's dialect issues that are there. So we have market development that needs to be done, and that requires market research. You also have to do market research with your channels as well. So those are some things that you have to think about, because it's an existing product in a new market. But if you happen to have a totally new product, okay, in a new market, then you're diversifying. So now you have a little more complexity. You still have to do that market research, but you need to think about the marketplace in terms of bringing in a new product with a, again, talking to which archetype are we going to go after? How are we going to position it? Against who we're going to position, or is this blue ocean versus red ocean type of marketplace? And what I mean by blue ocean is that basically it's open space, not very competitive, and you basically are creating the market, such as Yellowtail did in the wine space. Okay, whereas a red ocean is a fight for share, and it's something actually that's happening more and more in the beer business as well as in the highly fragmented wine marketplace. So this just gives you a sense of risk, okay? High risk with diversification that we see. All right, here's an example now in the ice cream space, okay? So, we're looking at Ben & Jerry's, and we're looking at current and new relative products and markets. And so you could see, if you want to do in a current market, say the U.S., market penetration is sell more to more Americans. Okay. If you go in a current market and you want to do product development, new product, then you are thinking about, could I do a line extension, a new products? Okay. And then we talked about in terms of brand extensions that are there, and that's a natural that fills out, if you remember from our branding lecture. And then if you go into new markets, and then you're getting into, we're going to go into South America. So we need to do some research, because the tastes of folks in South America may be very different. And I'll give you an example moving into the cola market. Coca-Cola in Mexico is very different than Coca-Cola in the United States. And there are certain things, the bottle is the same, so the brand look is the same, but the taste and and just even how they go and do some of their promotion just is a little bit different for the Latino community than in the United States. If you went new, then you might be diversifying. This gets very complicated, and it's again high risk. Think about this here. Ben & Jerry's is going to do clothing in South America. Is that a real good line extension? Is that a real good direction for the business? Okay, considering their core business is in basically the dessert business. Okay, in terms of providing a high quality gourmet ice cream product. So what about this expanding beyond the U.S., global versus multinational? And I'll go back to France versus Quebec. So, when we think about the continuum that ranges from a standardized marketing approach to entering more new markets, and one that customized entry, and I think this really sort of is the quandary that Colgate-Palmolive is wrestling with. Okay, global campaigns, and I worked in global marketing, is where, and that is really the mantra of global marketing, which is take the set campaign, the brand look, feel, materials, and just plaster it consistently over the world. The problem is that there are nuances in each individual market because of market dynamics and culture and economics, etc. So a multinational approach may be needed in some cases. I'll give you an example. If you go around the world and you go to a McDonald's, the McDonald's around the world are very, very different. I remember Scott Worthy, who taught me market research, told me about going to, I think it was into the Middle East. And he told me about going there, and they had a very interesting burger. Okay, and it fit the local tastes, and the burger was not beef. Okay, the burger was camel. Okay. In some places, the McDonald's, if you go into China, is very different than the U.S. So you need to think about customizing to local flavors and tastes, and that's what a multinational approach involves. We will give you a few other examples as we move along, but that raises the issue here in the Cleopatra case: is do we do basically a cut and paste? Just because they talk French, or do we take something and customize it accordingly, which is one of the options and still be able to hit that, I think it was a 4.5% growth. So most companies, when they're doing this, recognize that they can't do cut and paste. What they recognize is they're going to have to do some adjustment per market. And I know, having worked over at Allergan in the global marketing area when I was running medical marketing, is the study needs that would be, say, in Asia, and the emphasis in terms of certain types of studies that we would do and who we would work with would be different, because the prevalence of certain eye diseases were different in Asia. A classic example is in Asia, the prevalence of glaucoma tends to be higher with what we call closed angle disease versus in the United States and in the EU, which tends to be open angle. So some of the campaigns that we would do, the emphasis on studies, were going to be very, very different. In Europe, we had to consider in terms of some of the nature of practice that would be over in Europe and even in Africa, because in developing world countries, rather than having medical therapy as initial therapy, what they would do, and because adherence was poor because of the cost of medicines, that actually surgery became the first choice. So you need to be able to adapt to local practices, and that's why you find that while many companies try to go in this direction with a broad global campaign, they end up here because the demands of the multinationals. And keep in mind, you don't want to do like some auto companies did, where they launched a product, it was called the Chevy Nova. And what we found was that it just flopped over in Latin America, because anyone who knows Spanish should have known what the translation was, which is no go. So here's some examples, products that could go global. Coca-Cola, in the most part, in terms of the core branding, could, and Nike very easily, but Coca-Cola might have some adjustments in terms of their formula based on tastes within the marketplace. So there is some adjustments. Barbie's a classic, and even though it's a big brand across, how Barbie is dressed, looks, feels, will vary with each culture that's there. So this just gives you some examples of how global versus multinational will differ. So the other thing that you have to think about when you go global is, do you want to go in directly, doing direct investment and being there? And in this case, in the Cleopatra case, they already had an operation, so it's very easy to do the direct investment and go into that marketplace and to be able to compete in the soap marketplace. Okay, and you will have more control in that when you do that. But if you were a new player that coming into that marketplace and you had a new product, you might consider other things, such as, you might consider a joint venture with a local player who has penetration. And we see this in a variety of businesses around the world. And we see in pharmaceuticals sometimes, where we have some companies that really have stronger presence in certain parts of the world. You see joint ventures to spread out risk, both in terms of development costs, but most importantly, market development, because it may make more sense to go with an established player into that market, to be, especially if you have what we call a very, very saturated competitive market, which is a red ocean scenario. Alternatively, you could move down this curve here, and you could be thinking, I'm going to lower my involvement, I'm going to lower my profit potential here as well, because remember, the more directly involved, you're going to have higher profit potential, but you might just think about just licensing out your brand, and that's where you license out your trademark that's there. And then last but not least is in terms of, the least amount of involvement might be just directly exporting the product to a reseller that's there. So, and that we see that with OEMs, for instance. So this just gives you something to think about from a strategic standpoint. And if we go back to Cleopatra, what we realize is that the game that they wanted to play was definitely a direct game, because they were definitely a global company that competed in major markets, and Canada was a major market, and they just felt like the most natural starting off point based on the success of Cleopatra in France would be in Quebec. Okay, but they took that global approach. Maybe they needed to reassess and maybe take more of a multinational approach. So when we look at international products and promotional strategies, some things that you might want to think about. Number one is your strategy. Do you use the same promotion or a different promotion? Okay, do you use the same product or a product adaptation? Which really begs the question of, questions 2 and 3 that Steve was dealing with, which was, do we alter what we're doing? Okay, which really, if you think about it, they need to alter their branding a little bit, targeting their customer and working with the channel, which, I think that it sort of hints at something in terms of question 2 to hit that 4.5%. Or do they totally say, you know what, this product is just going to be a dog. It's never going to get traction in this marketplace. It totally misses to the audience, and therefore we need to adapt it. And I heard a few teams talking about, rather than the wrapper being like in France, I think the French wrapper was more paper, where I think they made this more glossy. So a little adaptation, or maybe the perfume content was just a little bit too strong for the women in Quebec. And remember, culturally, Paris and France, they're used to having a perfume. It's a part of their culture and behavior. Might be also because sometimes some folks in Europe don't necessarily take a shower every day. But that's another story. Whereas in Canada, you may have different set of needs and different set of cultural attitudes to products that have high perfume concentration and characteristics. So, long story short, promotional strategy. You can do a different promotion, which we see in some cases. What we would do is, promotional adaptations, and in this case could be, with bicycles and motorcycles and outboard motors. We're not going to change the product, but we may change how it's served up, and its branding and its value story that is there, and how it looks. Okay, e.g. Nova. Okay, in Latin America, or in some cases, like we talked about Coca-Cola and some other big brands like Kodak Film, especially when it was very popular. This is a business that's sort of just gone down the drain with digital, as we know, or Wrigley's Gum, which is, again, a global product. There's a straight extension where you can go same promotion, same product around the world. But we need to keep in mind product adaptation. Pharmaceuticals tend to be either in the straight extension, or we'll see some promotion adaptation based on market needs, and tends to be more in this segment here, because the claims basis in some countries may be different as well, because based on the data and the regulatory authorities, the claims on a product label for a pharmaceutical or biotech product, or even a medical device, may be a little bit different just because of regulatory issues. So as a result, the promotion may be different. Okay. Case example with Capitan in Europe, it was going at once a day, whereas in US we could not. I think it was a twice a day product that the promotion that's there. Or you just adapt the product, okay? And we see that, like for instance, Exxon gasoline's got to adapt because of just differences in terms of climate, regulatory, etc. So there may be these things that we have to think about in terms of the actual product, or Campbell's soup in terms of nature of soup and tastes that are there. So, while the brand may stay the same, the product may change. And I'll use the example of even like Coca-Cola in Mexico. Sometimes there's some adaptation that's there. Okay. But in Coca-Cola, they do have, a water product that easily can move across borders because water is tasteless. Okay, so Fiji water around the world. Okay, that's not going to change. Okay, in terms of product adaptation, its promotion adaptation may change depending on attitudes about water, but I think it would probably end up fitting into more of a straight extension. Fiji Water is a product of the wonderful company which also owns Justin. And then we get into dual adaptation, so coffee being one where you're based on coffee taste and also how you promote and how the coffee, or clothing. Some clothing can be based on different cultural tastes that are there, as well as climate that is around. So these are some things that you have to think about. I think it's a great grid to be able to think about as you're taking a product in the market. So I think we could go net for Cleopatra that we're probably dealing with a promotional adaptation if we go into this marketplace. Right? Global, multinational. So that's just another thing to point out. Global, as we talked beforehand, tends to be more along these lines in terms of promotional strategy, where multinational is going to be differentiation. So here's some examples. So what type of strategy being used? So what we find is, I love this, McDonald's in India, all veggie restaurant, right? Cows are sacred in India. But look at Mr. Clean, okay, where we have, and this is more of a product adaptation, whereas if you look at Mr. Clean, what you do see is some consistency in the brand look and even the name, so that is there. So it's more of a straight adoption. You may find, depending on marketplaces, some minor promotional adaptations, but this seems like this is straight across. So big global brands like Mr. Clean, here's a good, and the only adaptation was just because of language. So let's apply to the Cleopatra case, okay? So I think we talked about this, is that, first and foremost, Colgate-Palmolive thought that this was truly a global brand. Wrong. Sorry. Do not pass go and collect $200. So the market has spoken, and they could not take what they had in France and pull it over to Quebec. So we believe that, and I think most of us will agree based on the presentations, that it really fits in this promotion adaptation. What's interesting is you might also consider here what we call a product adaptation as well as a promotional adaptation. That's because of the perfume scent qualities, and maybe moving off that a little bit in terms of maybe lesser of a perfume and maybe more the emollients, which is more of a formulation issue, but still be able to play with the same brand, e.g. Coca-Cola in Mexico. So, the other thing that I think is really important is segmentation. And as you can see on the left-hand side, this is our good old Porter's segmentation, which talks about looking at your market scope, broad or narrow, and then the source of competitive advantage. So differentiation is very, very key in a broad marketplace. But, here we get to focus. You have to micro-segmentation. So micro-segmentation in the soap market may be very critical to win. Are you going to be just a general utility soap? Are you going to be a soap for men? Are you going to be a beauty bar? Are you going to do like Neutrogena? Sorry, I'm thinking Neupogen, but anyway, Neutrogena, which it really has positioned itself as a medicinal product for dermatologists, and dermatologists recommend it. So it's soap. It's in that business, but they've segmented their market accordingly. So several things to successful segmentation. It should be distinctive, recognizable, durable, sizable, and actionable. And that's important because if you're going to, you need to be able to do that analysis to say, am I in or not? And this is important for when you even start a business. You want to be able to target in who's the customer and what is the segment. Is the segment large enough? So TAM, SAM, SOM is you really want to know, one, is it large enough? Do I have CAGR? So do I have reasonable growth? Is it recognizable? And can we act on it? Do I have too many competitors in it? Or do I have the opportunity to be able to penetrate? So I'm going to pull a few things from what we had done for Kelly. We didn't do exactly the assignment that I had given to you. We had a two-part assignment here with many more questions than you all had in the back end of this assignment. And this is one of the responses questions. So this just gives you a sense of a prototypical response. Our instructor wanted short, to the point, but with data. And this actually is good for business memos. And so when I talk about Minto, what I talk about is getting to the bottom line up front in your first paragraph. Okay? Smack the dog on the nose. So you got attention, and that the executive knows what this is all about. So there's the bottom line. Here's the data that we felt that were very important in terms of the segments that we had: skincare, refreshment, and utility, if you remember from the case. But when we look at the size of the market and the growth, so the growth deals with the CAGR and the competitors. So these three components are very critical in assessing these type of marketplaces that are there. And then based on these factors and these data, what we ended up doing is doing some analysis and then being able to set, is this attractive? High, medium, low, the meat of current key criteria, okay, and then potential for growth that is there, and then features that drive attractiveness. So that was sort of the basis, what we threw into attractiveness, which would have helped Steve Boyd in his decision whether he wanted to basically bail or, basically divest from the business, or be able to play in that business, which would lead to, okay, we're going to change how we market in this business, or maybe even a little bit about the formulation in the product. So as you can see, skincare, which involves beauty bars, and think about Canadian, if we're going to position, okay, it's not going to be refreshment like an Irish Spring, which would be for a working man, athlete, etc., or utility, which is basically cost-sensitive customers. It's basically your basic, Ivory soap type of product, which has a tremendous brand presence and market share. But the skincare market is interesting because it's sort of like what we have with Neutrogena in terms of a little medicinal, or there's some sort of benefit and to certain subsegments, so sub-market segments. So this is where we get into the archetype. Who is the archetype that is there? And so if you think about it, we had a broad target of women, and I think some folks had even, two different segments. But realistically, where skincare is really, really, really important is one is women, and women who are getting older, getting to middle age and later age. Why? Well, there's twofold in Canada. First of all, is that you're dealing with a cold and hot environment during the winter. And particularly the cold and the wind that you deal with in terms of more Arctic-like environments are going to put more stress on and going to have an effect and dry out the skin. Number two, and so as a result, you need moisture. You need moisturization to keep the skin supple. And as you get older as well, men and women, what you do is you lose your collagen. And as a result, and as I know this from Botox and collagen, what happens is you develop these ugly little things called wrinkles. Okay. And if you are a woman who is now hitting, say late 30s into 40s, and you want to maintain that youthful appearance, and if you are a working woman in, say, marketing and sales or in entertainment, you want to have that look. And I know that especially as you look at more wealthy and more professional women in, say, Montreal, you're dealing a little more with that need that is there as you get on. So you start seeing there's microsegmentation, which is attractive. And there's a potential for growth, which was part of our analysis that was there. Okay, so, and you can see the market size is good. The growth is positive versus negative. And third is that if you look at the number of competitors that are there, it's not as bad as other sectors that would be there. So, you have some Colgate-Palmolive products, there, but you do have, 6 competitors. So those are things that you have to sort of put in the fact. You might micro-segment it a little bit more and go ultra, and then see if you can separate out the sub-segment markets as well. But the key feature driving this is size growth. Number of new products was something that we had discovered, that's there. So, and then as a result is that the potential to differentiate. So these are things that you have to factor into your thought process. And then some further segmentation analysis that we ended up doing is that looking at segment factors and Colgate-Palmolive strengths. So I think that relates to one of the questions, but we actually put together a scorecard based on some things that we had learned from Phil Kotler in his marketing textbook. So we rated sectors on a 5-point scale, high to low, and we felt that potential performers in terms of these two segments were we identified that utility fell into what we call muscle or no money, which means basically we're just going to, you have to have basically already established presence that are there. Okay. So that's the thing, but potential performers were more attractive that were there, and that's where we found that skin care really scored very, very high when we did what we call a scale of various factors in the segment, which was measurable, reachable, profitable, relevant, and looking at some of the strengths that Colgate-Palmolive brings. And that's why I posed that question to you all relative to, do they have the resources? One, could they compete here? And how could they compete? And one of the things I don't have in here, but I had in another presentation when we talked about strategy, was about having a positioning statement which helps guide who you present it against, but who do you position for, what the job to do is based on the particular need, who do you position against by, and what makes you different, which is your essential benefit. So hopefully out of this, what I've been able to articulate for you all has been, that in this case, Colgate-Palmolive probably needed to take and have a scope to focus in on the market and do a little market research to understand, as we're saying, targeting and who their key customers are, both in terms of the archetype of the customer who would benefit in this, in that that segment that really is going to be, going to appreciate the skin care, okay? And be able to differentiate himself in that space that is there. So, and then looking at the micro segment that we're talking about being the, basically probably the late 30s into the 40s, into 50s, female who's already got some issues, who really wants something, wants to make the, and remember, think about benefits here. Why do you buy this? You buy it because you want to look youthful. You want to build additional self-confidence, because there are doubts, because wrinkles do that when you get older. That's just stuff that just starts, raising confidence issues. And the product job to do at the end of the day is to help this customer feel good about herself, good about how she looks to her peers, to her husband, and just to feel luxurious because she's worth it, and she's willing because she's worth it. And I think there's actually a hair color campaign which goes at a premium, because I'm worth it. And in fact, there's a great song, Because I'm Worth It. Okay. And it plays well. Because you're worth it, you should be able to enjoy the luxury soap that not only makes your skin feel supple, makes your skin moisture, but what it does is it improves the complexion, it improves how you present yourself, improves how you feel. These are benefits, okay? Unlike what we saw in the ad copy, which drove me crazy to see that. And that what the challenge should be is to the Dove users is take this challenge for 5 days and see if you see a difference. Okay, and throw a coupon in there, something like that. But have a call to action that's there. So you are ready, you aim through the scope, you know who you're going after, and before you fire, make sure that you've got that pull ready to go with your branding, and it talks to that customer, but then you have the proper push. And this is the other thing, understanding that other customer, which happens to be, it's going to be the individual who is working in retail and in channel, and their game is about real estate. It's about making turns, okay? And when you make investments in that relationship, and this is where having good market research with them and having great trade relationships, and many companies have a trade relations manager or a sales force that works the trade, okay, because they need to make sure that that channel's working. But rather than giving bulk discounts, a smart manager, what they do is create incentives to reward behavior that is win-win. And what I mean by that is in essence, is that what you're going to do is you're going to have a load-in, okay? You will have a payment for product placement on shelves. You're paying for the real estate, so you're paying for something versus just a growth. So you're not creating the expectation that you're going to just ante into the poker game, but you're paying for that space. You're paying for end cap. You're paying. Here's a coupon. Put the coupon at the point of purchase, especially early on, and you get a kicker out of that. And based on the coupons that are moving, we can track the coupons that are there, so it gives us good metrics that are there. We'll buy data from you, okay, so we could better understand tracking and who's doing based on your loyalty cards that are there. And then last but not least is we'll give you a volume incentive. So if we hit our numbers at that 4.5%, then you get a kicker as well. That's how you work with the trade. You don't do in terms of broad volume. So now that you got what we call the push together, then you have your pull together. Now it's ready to fire. So this is the whole bottom line, is ready, aim, and fire versus fire, ready, aim. So thank you all for great presentations this week. I look forward to catching up with you on Wednesday when I come back from Orlando, and I certainly hope that this video gave you some perspective, both in terms of some strategic tools that you can use when you work in marketing, but also in terms of putting in perspective to the case. All right, I look forward to our further discussion next week. Have a great week, and this will be one of the two video assignments that you will have in lieu of class on Monday.